Welcome to Have a Life Teaching, the podcast designed for educators who are dedicated to enhancing their teaching practice and creating a positive impact on their students' lives. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of education, exploring a wide range of topics related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment in K-12 schools. Together, we'll learn from the brightest minds in the education field. So if you're a passionate educator who's ready to take your teaching practice to the next level, join us as we explore the exciting world of education. My name is John Shimbari, signing in and saying, let's have a life teaching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Have a Life Teaching podcast. As my listeners know, who have been following the podcast, we have talked about how to teach hard history, about how we should be teaching students about uncomfortable historical events. But as my next guest and I are going to talk about, we need to talk about more than just hard history. We also have to talk about the hard present. And we need to use history as a guide to help us in teaching our students about current events so they could understand the society that they live in now. My guest is Jeremy Kaplan. He's assistant principal with the New York City Public Schools, and he is the assistant principal of health professions and the Human Services High School in the city. He is also an ongoing and regular contributing editor to Chalkbeat, which is how I learned about the work that Jeremy is doing, because I found his article, which is titled Talking to Students About the Trump Assassination Attempt Won't Be Easy, but we should do it anyway. I found the article very impactful and interesting, and I really wanted to have him on the show. So Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So Jeremy, we shouldn't just be teaching hard history. We should also be looking at how we're teaching our students about the world that they are currently living in. And when events like the assassination attempt on President Trump occur, we really can't, or we really shouldn't sweep those topics under the carpet, because our students are looking at the news. They do probably have questions about that. And I know your focus, Jeremy, is not specifically on assassination and the history of assassination in our country, but teaching the hard present. So can you tell us a little bit more about what prompted you to write this specific article about the Trump assassination attempt? What was your purpose in writing the article?
I supervise history teachers. And when you look at traditional history curriculum in New York State, it's typically a chronological curriculum. And the 10th grade global ends in a Regents exam. The 11th grade U.S. history ends in a Regents exam. The main purpose really is to do well, to pass the Regents. My thinking is, why do we want young people to learn what happened in the past? To me, the most important reason is because we want them to be informed, engaged citizens of the world today. We want them to be able to enter into the conversations that we're having today as a society. Assassination attempt. Who should be president? What should tax policy be? What should immigration policy be? These are issues that we're dealing with right now. We're going to continue to deal with them. And we want our young people, as they grow up and starting now, to be engaged with these issues. That really, to me, is the whole purpose of learning history. At least the best purpose is to have our young people become more informed, engaged citizens today. But that's not really the way our education system is constructed right now. So that's really my main purpose of writing the Chalkbeat article and why I'm here. I really want to try to promote the idea, prioritizing, I want to say current events, but to me, it's more than that phrase. It's what's happening today in our society. It's what's happening recently in our society. To me, that's what I want to promote.
So how are we preparing our students to engage in conversations about, like you're mentioning, the world that we're living in or the country we're living in today? Also, how are we utilizing, again, what's happening now in the election? Now, our students that we teach now, they're not going to be necessarily voting in this election unless they're 18, but still using this election could help formulate their thinking when they are able to vote as citizens when they are of the age. So your goal of teaching the quote unquote present, I believe, Jeremy, is an important one. And so I think this question of, do we teach history and social studies and current events, quote unquote, thematically or chronologically, is an important conversation that social studies educators have been having for a while. Because we know that you want to look more thematically, at least right now, at issues affecting our students and affecting all of our lives, how would you recommend then educators take events such as the assassination attempt on President Trump, rather than shying away from them? How would you recommend they do use these events in their teaching?
I think we can think about the short term, like what could teachers be doing starting in September? And then I think we should step back and kind of look at the bigger picture in the longer term for what I would really love to see the education system move to. I told my social studies teachers, I don't care what grade they're teaching or what content they're teaching. My challenge to them was figure out how to incorporate the election into your class in the beginning of next year in September, October. That's not typical. And ninth grade global teachers may not be thinking about teaching the US election, 10th grade global teachers, et cetera. This year is the only time in our students' high school career that they're going to encounter a presidential election. It's the only time. It happens every 4 years. So use this as an opportunity to teach our election system, to get them engaged in the conversations that we're having today as a country. Talk about Trump and the Republicans. What does he believe in? What do they believe in? We just had these major events, an assassination attempt, Biden dropped out, Kamala Harris. How do they feel about her? What do they know about her? What is our election system? I think students vaguely know about the Electoral College. I found they know that they don't like it, but they don't really understand how it works. It's a real opportunity to engage kids in this election in particular, in the election process in general. All history teachers, at least, really should make some kind of attempt to incorporate it. You can go on each of their official campaign websites and look and see what they look like and analyze them. You go on social media. It's really a great opportunity to bring in social media in various ways, but it's a way to not only teach kids information, but then really critically look at social media. What can you learn? How do you separate or identify information, truth from opinion or falsehood? Is truth even what's important in social media? To me, that's the short term. And there are a lot of great resources. There's iCivics for teaching the civic structures of our government. There's the New York Times Learning Network, which is a blog which has issues with current events, articles, and lessons related to the election. There's really a lot of resources out there. The question is obviously January 6th, and all the events surrounding that, and Trump claiming the election was fraudulent, and there's trials, indictments. There's so much out there. It's not a question of what we could do. It's a question of figuring out like what's the important thing and paring it down. But I'm urging my teachers as much as possible, incorporate it, use this as an opportunity to engage kids in the election that's happening. If we want to step back and look at the longer term, which I'm really interested in, I really think we should rethink this idea of kids taking chronological history every year. Because this whole thing about chronological history, it's the classic thing is, well, we never make it to the present. The fact that students are learning what happened in the past and they don't ever get an opportunity to actually talk about what's happening now, or even what's happened in the last 40 years, to me is a real tragedy. Because again, for me, the purpose of learning about the past is to create engaged young people who are engaged in the present. You can engage in the present to change the future. That's what I want to see. So we have to reformulate the curriculum. So for example, if you think about teaching thematically, instead of just starting at the beginning, whatever that is, and going forward, why not have a unit on voting rights? And you could look at voting rights as formulated in the Constitution. You could hit major milestones of property qualifications, race, gender, and then look at what the voting rights situation happening today. Compare New York with Texas, with Georgia. Have a unit on social equality and look at major milestones of racial and gender equality, and have students be able to engage with different issues of social equality today. What we now call civics, which is right now sort of a separate In New York State, it's like the last class you take before you graduate, which I think is tragic. To me, every class really should be a civics class. And you learn about the past with the main purpose to engage with the present. And if you do that, I think it'll be more engaging for kids. They'll go out and then it creates opportunities for doing things like actually engaging in civics. If you want kids to learn civics, they actually have to do civics. That means finding issues that they care about. It means reaching out and finding organizations and people that are actually dealing with those issues and engaging with them.
I love that, Jeremy, and you're preaching to the choir. I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit. I agree that we do need to look at history, not just chronologically, but thematically as well. In states or localities where there isn't a social studies test per se, I think that's a little easier because what I sometimes tell social studies educators is, look, when this is the case, your subject is not tested in this state. So use this as an opportunity to teach thematically and to teach literacy to help students do better on their English and literacy exams, which are tested in most states or in most localities. I think what you're proposing is much easier in a state or a locality that is not testing social studies. Now, in a state like you mentioned before, New York, that has regents, I'm sure even some of your teachers have pushed back and said, but kids have to sit for this global studies test at the end of the year. If I spend time teaching the election or teaching the hard present, quote unquote, it's going to put me behind in teaching the content that the students are going to be tested on. What do you say to those teachers in a more structured system?
Well, right now we have the regents, and if they're teaching to the regents, that really is their number one goal. And I will never tell a teacher do something that they think is not going to help achieve that goal. That's their primary job, is to get kids to do well in the regents. One thing I think it's important for people to realize is that New York State has recently come out publicly and saying that they are going to change the graduation structure, the graduation requirement structure. Regents will become optional, and they're going to create a whole new system that they're calling Portrait of a Graduate. There's different competencies. They're really blowing up the whole system at the secondary level. And this fall, they're going to come out with a timetable for that. And if they really follow through with this, to me, in my point of view, it really presents an amazing opportunity in New York State to do what I'm trying to advocate for, which is to really rethink, definitely history classes and other classes as well. And then we can do things like prioritize civics, prioritize current events, get kids to make connections between the past and the present, and even do things like spend time engaging with organizations. There are a lot of great organizations that I've come in contact with recently. There's an organization called Why Vote, which has after-school programming, summer programming, and they engage kids in issues and civics. It might be that kids will have multiple pathways for graduation. So it might be that if a student engages in civics in an after school or summer program, that might satisfy the Portrait of a Graduate criteria of becoming a global citizen. And that will expand the potential opportunity for students to actually engage with the world and use the world as a classroom and not just stay within the four walls of school.
Yes. And we've also talked on the podcast about partnerships with organizations. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Again, the article brought me to you. Let me ask you a few questions about the article, if I can. What parts of the current election cycle we find ourselves in do you think high school social studies educators should focus on? What parts of what's going on now, again, whether that's the assassination attempt, whether that's the current election cycle, what parts are most important for our students to understand and recognize?
One big piece is the actual election that's happening right now. We need to teach kids enough so they can engage with the election. That's who the people are. Who is Trump? What does he believe in? What has he done? What did he do as president? Who's Kamala Harris? What has she done? What does she want to do? And then stepping back from there, I think the issues of being a Republican or being a Democrat, that's a really important thing to teach because kids really, my experience is many kids don't really understand. And so it's hard for them to enter into the conversation when there's a lot of talk about partisanship, republicanism, there's left, right. There's all these sort of jargony terms that people who know politics understand. But if you don't understand them, it's hard for them to enter into the conversations. What do Republicans typically believe in? What do Democrats believe in? Green Party, et cetera. Getting them onto the actual materials, getting them to watch clips of the debate, clips of the different conventions, et cetera. Clips of, like I said before, January 6th. So that, to me, that's one big piece, is getting them involved in this election so that they feel like they're engaged with that, and then getting them to follow the news with this election. And that's another big piece, I think, about being an engaged, informed citizen, is following the news, which kids, as many hours a day as I find that they're on their phones and social media, they don't go on news apps. Take 10 minutes a day and follow the news. To me, that's a habit of democracy. So that's one piece. This election now, what's happening? What do you think? Who would you vote for if you could? That's one piece. The other piece is the election system in general. How do our elections work? We say we're in a democracy. What does that mean? And when you dig a little deeper and look under the hood, it gets really complicated really quickly. And I find a lot of students, when we teach in the 12th grade government class, when we teach our election system like gerrymandering, they've never heard of it, but they're interested. They kind of get it. It's not so simple as one person, one vote. Like I said before, they've heard about the Electoral College generally, but they don't really understand how it works, but they're interested. Teaching how our system works, and then if you're teaching a global history class, comparing that to other countries, I think is very important. A lot of our students at our school, a lot of our families are from other countries too. So giving them an opportunity to research their home country, it opens up a whole world of understanding governments and how different governments work here and around the world.
Two follow-up questions. One, how would you recommend a teacher who is fearful of saying the wrong thing in this political environment? What would you tell them about how they could go about or should go about teaching, quote unquote, the hard present? And then the second part of the question is, and I understand your perspective as a high school administrator, so answer the second part of the question any way you feel best able. How would you recommend, say, elementary, middle school also teach about the hard present or teach about the election systems?
The most important thing is the context in which you're teaching. By that, I mean what school, what community, what locality, what state. It really depends on your particular situation. I mean, I feel lucky to be in New York City to teach these controversial issues to the extent that you feel like you're comfortable. I mean, that would be, I don't like to be too prescriptive with people, but so that's one thing, is what's your context? And then, what are you comfortable with as a teacher? I would never suggest or try to tell a teacher to do something they're not comfortable with. I think a teacher always has to be comfortable with doing whatever they're doing. Who are they as a teacher? Who are your students? What are they comfortable with? It's about building community in class, which is just about having a good, safe space in general, where kids feel comfortable sharing an opinion, maybe comfortable disagreeing with each other in a respectful way, agreeing or disagreeing with the teacher, and engaging in a respectful, critical conversation. And then obviously teachers have to do things that are age appropriate. And I think they have a sense of who their students, their kids are, what's age appropriate for them. Asking students, no matter how old the students are, what are you hearing? What do you know? What do you think you know about what's happening? Because it's not about getting the right answer and knowing the right things. It's about just finding out where they're at. What are they bringing to the table? And then from there, you want to deepen their knowledge and engage them in conversations that are engaging and appropriate for them.
As you were talking, Jeremy, what resonated with me is the tie into so many other things we're trying to do with education these days, which is social emotional learning. You were mentioning, how do we agree and disagree with peers? And this isn't just for students, this is for adults too in this current climate. And how can bringing in social emotional learning help with that? Because it's the election right now, but it could be a completely different issue next year. But those skills of how we talk to people across the aisle are skills that our students are going to be able to use throughout their whole lives. I think that gives credence to why we don't want to push away from these conversations, because that is important in a democracy, to be able to have those differing viewpoints and to be able to argue those differing viewpoints. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. And then I liked how you said with younger groups to be age appropriate. And when you said that, I was thinking, well, maybe you're not going to go into all of, for example, President Trump's background, but maybe you could bring up the process of what an election is. Does that make sense to you?
It does. And if I could go back to what you were talking about, getting young people to actually be able to talk to each other. If you look at the typical American classroom, I think I would venture to say at the high school level, many classrooms are still in rows, maybe pair rows, maybe small groups, but typical class is set up for the students to listen to the teacher talk. One thing we have to do pedagogically, if we can get into the weeds a little bit of pedagogy, we need to prioritize more student discussion, which means students talking to each other, which might mean changing the way kids are sitting so that they're able to actually look at each other and talk to each other. It means asking bigger questions, what we call essential questions. Questions like, who should be the next president? That's an authentic question that our country is dealing with now. It's an open-ended question with no one right answer. And then we have to engage in structures. One structure that we use a lot that I love is called the Socratic seminar, but it's really just a fancy term for having a discussion. And you have to prepare kids. It's an extended conversation that the teacher may facilitate once in a while, but really it's the teacher physically and otherwise stepping back and letting kids talk to each other for an extended period of time. And if they're well prepared, we like to do it at the end of a unit, at the end of like 2 or 3 or 4 weeks of a study. If you do it at the end of an elections unit, who should be the next president, they're going to engage and they're prepared and they've read and watched various things and they've taken notes and they're prepared to have this discussion. They're going to have a lot to say. And I think we have to allow space to do that. And it's different than a debate. And debates can be good too. Debates are you assign kids a particular side and they give them a structure for going back and forth. And there's a time and place for that. But if your goal is, like you said, to create young people who can talk across differences and respectfully, then I think the Socratic seminar structure works better because it's not about winning. You're not on one side. It's about exploring these big questions. And actually, we want students to ask each other questions and we want them to learn and maybe even change their opinion here and there. I just want to put that out there as sort of things that are happening. Those type of pedagogies I think we have to do more of in this country.
I totally agree. And one thing I like about the Socratic method, and you were highlighting this, is it really does ask our students, or really anyone engaged in the Socratic method, to be prepared, to read, to analyze, to watch, to cite evidence to support their claim. Whereas we can get beyond this non-evidence, this is my opinion and it's just equally valid. Well, maybe your opinion isn't equally valid if it's not based on evidence. The other thing you said that I'd like to dig into a little bit, said that you wanted your teachers to really be bringing in the quote unquote hard present and teaching that in their classrooms. We've also talked about ways to do that where the students are owning the learning, where the students are having the conversations. What does that look like right now in your school? How are some of the teachers going about doing that?
They're doing that in different ways. And I think one of the great things about current events is that it really gives opportunity for some student choice, which I think is super important. You know, they can choose. Sometimes some of our teachers, and what I've done is have it just like a weekly assignment, a really open-ended assignment. I'll give them 5 minutes at the beginning of each class. And actually, at our school, kids have their phones because I want to teach them the habit of following the news. Kind of like what they call do now is, you know, actually take out your phones, open up your news app and take a couple minutes to peruse the headlines. And then we talk about what they notice. I might project the New York Times front page on their website, and I'll maybe talk through some of the big things that are happening and what do they want to know more about. So we just spend a couple minutes every day exploring what's happening. And then as a weekly assignment, they pick an article, they write about it, and then we talk about it. You can do that a little more structured way. Some of my teachers are having a little bit more like sort of structured conversations or debates. So one of my teachers picked a topic like, should TikTok be banned? And gave students some time over a few days to find some different sources, take some notes, and then they had a conversation about that. Another teacher in the 9th grade did what she called like sort of fun Fridays, and they would pick a topic, student generated topic, and then research, and then kind of have like a mini debate on Fridays. You can also do it connected, like sort of thematically to the unit that you're studying. So if you're studying Reconstruction, for example, well, let's look at racial representation in Congress today. Let's find articles in the news today that relate to racial justice, et cetera. So those are some of the ways I think we're incorporating current events and the hard present into our teaching.
And I like that too, Jeremy, because then it's not an either or. It's not an either chronological or thematic, but how are you bringing in the thematic into the chronological?
Correct. One thing I'll say is don't wait until the end of the year to teach the present. Incorporate the present in each unit.
So, Jeremy, we've talked about a lot of aspects of teaching social studies, teaching hard truths, ways to engage students in discussions around civics, and just generally how to improve their ability to talk across the aisle. What have we not talked about that listeners should know when it comes to teaching the quote unquote hard present?
There's an interesting question of the teacher's role in these issues. I watch the news. I do some climate activism. I'm a human being. I'm a citizen of the world. What role do I have as an engaged citizen, as a person, in my role as a teacher teaching these issues? And I think that's something that is part of the national conversation right now, in particular, because of the election and the particular nature of this election and the particular nature of our partisan divide and states that are passing laws restricting self-expression. The National Council of the Social Studies has written a statement in favor of academic freedom, and they sent that around to educators and asking for comments. I wrote some comments today. So I just think that's an important issue for people to think about. It's not the teacher's role to get students to think the way they think. But I think it's too simple just to say teachers should leave their opinions to themselves. Because if we're trying to develop our young people into engaged citizens, and if I'm an engaged citizen, aren't I sort of a role model for that? I'm passionate about climate change. I'm not going to hide that from my students in fear that they may also become climate activists. No, why would I not model for them what engaged activism looks like? It increases learning when students know more about their teachers.
Agreed. And I think there is also, too, a difference between saying to students, this is how I am presenting myself and acting as an involved citizen. This is a model of how I am an engaged citizen. This is an example of how I arranged a protest. But that's not me saying to you, you need to believe what I believe on this issue. It's just, this is how you go about in a democracy protesting. This is how you go about manifesting your civil rights to free speech. This is how you not go about it. This is how you do go about it. This is how I've chosen to manifest or represent myself. But again, you represent the issues that you feel are important to you. So I do think, although it's tricky, like you mentioned, Jeremy, it can be done where students can still see you as a human being and as a model of what you're actually teaching. Because I agree with you. If we're saying it's important to be active and engaged citizens of a democracy, and we are the social studies teacher and we are not actively engaged, that's a problem. On the other hand, keeping that remove and saying, this is the process, this is the way, but I'm not telling you what to think, could be a way of handling that trickiness. It's still going to be tricky, but it can be done.
Right, because this is what I care about. What do you care about?
Exactly.
And that's actually what we do in the 12th grade. We partner with Civics for All, which is a division of the public schools. And there's a unit called Project Soapbox. And that's how we begin our government classes. We get kids to identify an issue they care about, and they do some research and they write a speech about that issue.
So, Jeremy, where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
Well, like you mentioned, I have written a few articles for Chalkbeat, so that's the place they can look.
Awesome. So, Jeremy Kaplan, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a very informative conversation.
Good. You're welcome. Thank you so much for talking.
Thank you for listening today. I hope you got some great tips that you can bring back into your teaching. Remember, have a life teaching without sacrificing your own. Also, don't forget to subscribe and be well.